Professor Marlière, thank you so very much for joining our interview series.
My pleasure. Hello.
Let me start right away with the first question. You have distinguished between authoritarianism and fascism in recent analysis. Given Le Pen's ideological evolution and her party's increasing parliamentary power, where would you situate her movement today?
Well, I would call Marine Le Pen's National Rally a party. It's a far-right party, so I think if you want to position the party on a left-right axis, as political scientists do, I think it's a far-right party. That's the way a lot of people see it in France today. Le Pen doesn't like to be called far-right because far-right means that you are on the fringe, on the extreme of politics, but that's how pollsters, the media, call the party see it. So it's far-right. It's not fascist. I don't think the National Rally can be described as a fascist party. Fascism is something quite specific. You can find fascism today in some countries and some parties, but I don't think National Rally is fascist. I would call it nativist. The main concern of the National Rally is, the support through policies, the support of uh, the indigenous population, the French, as they describe it, as opposed to non-French people or migrants. So nativist, reactionary, probably a lot of the National Rally's policies, its ideology seems to be uh, willing to get back to a situation, or sometimes a kind of a mythical situation, one that France never absolutely experienced, in fact. One, of course, because its native is with less migrants, less foreigners. So reactionary in that sense. I used to defend policies which were not liberal in a sense. For a very long time, the party was in favor of the death penalty, was against abortion, was against LGBTQ rights. It has evolved in that. So now it's no longer the case, and that's probably a point we're going to discuss. Um, and finally, reactionary nativist far right. That's the way I would describe it. Fascism, as I said, is different. It's about trying to establish a totalitarian regime. It can have a kind of it can launch racial politics. It can be undermining or challenging directly the rule of law. I don't think the National Rally is willing to do that, but of course, once elected, they might try to do that. But I think if you put the National Rally in the political context at the moment, I think it's a party which, if elected, would go along uh, the main institutions in France, in Europe, would certainly work alongside the European partners within the European Union. So, for all these reasons, that's the far right party, but not a fascist party.
Right. How do you assess the political implications of Marine Le Pen's conviction and subsequent disqualification from running for office in 2027, given the National Rally's efforts to portray itself as a respectable, anti corruption alternative to the political establishment? To what extent does this judicial outcome represent a decisive rupture in the party's quest for power? And could it destabilize its electoral momentum ahead of a crucial presidential race?
It's definitely Le Pen's conviction, and together with up to 20 people in the party, 20 elected people, mostly in the European Parliament, is a big blow. I think it's certainly a big blow for Le Pen. To start with, Le Pen might not be able to run in 2027. As far as I'm concerned, I think the decision will not be overturned in appeal. She won't run, so there will have to be someone else. I think for the time being, she's fighting. She wants to clear her name, but the conviction is so blatant. the charges of corruption are so clear, and her defense and the party's defense has been, in my view, so bad that it will be very, very hard. So it's a big blow for that reason for Le Pen, because she could be seen as having a good chance of winning in 2027 presidential election. So she would probably not be running. But it's also more widely a big blow for the party because, as you said, it's a party that has become more and more normalized, coming across as a party which is not on the fringe of politics, extreme, but a party which was whose ideas, whose members and party officials were regarded more and more as some kind of, I wouldn't say belonging to the mainstream politics, not yet, not entirely, but to some extent as a party which certainly was no longer the early National Front of Jean-Marie Le Pen, a party that really scared a lot of people. So it's a big blow for the party because part of the appeal of the party so far was to be seen increasingly as a party which was no longer extreme by a majority of voters, or at least a good solid base of 37-40% of the electorate, while at the same time being very critical of the system, i.e., the other mainstream parties, which were described as corrupt, as being part of a kind of de facto coalition of parties which were running very bad policies for France and the French people. So, of course, if you are now convicted of and proven guilty of corruption, it's a big blow because a lot of Le Pen's um, um, rhetoric was really targeting the other parties, branding them corrupt, branding them in collusion and working in a very corrupt system. So suddenly that charge is applied to her. There is evidence, and it seems that according to the first opinion polls, a lot of people seem to regard the National Rally as a corrupt party. At least it seems to think that the condemnation of the party in the first instance by the judges last week was grounded.
All right. In a democracy, how should we balance judicial independence with the political fallout when a leading presidential contender like Marine Le Pen is barred from running due to financial crimes? Do you see this ruling as reinforcing or undermining public trust in French institutions? Moreover, is there a risk that even if legally justified, it will fuel far-right conspiratorial narratives about elites silencing dissent? How should mainstream parties navigate this moment without inadvertently legitimizing those populist frames?
Well, as you would expect, Le Pen's defense and a party's defense was to uh, to cry out and to say that, of course, it is a denial of democracy, that the conviction was politically motivated, that judges are politicized and they want to bar her from running because she would probably win. That's all she said in a rally last Sunday in Paris, Place Vauban. There was a big rally, and she said all that. And all week, Le Pen herself and followers, supporters, have been saying that. So that's, of course, their narrative. It doesn't mean that the narrative, of course, is true. And I think that narrative should absolutely be taken with a big pinch of salt and challenge. Let's start from the heart of the matter. What is the heart of the matter? It's Le Pen's and um, supporters' conviction. She's guilty. She's guilty of an act of corruption, which are very serious. Several million euros of public funds were diverted to fake jobs. So that's we start from there. She's guilty. But I think uh, with the support of some of the media in France, not all of them, some of them, the discussion has shifted from that conviction, from Le Pen's guilt, to uh, a kind of debate on politicized judges, denial of democracy. I think I am very, very skeptical, if not very critical of that of Le Pen's narrative, because it seems to me that the judges did their job simply. They applied the law. By the way, who passed the law? That law, which led to the conviction of Le Pen and to with immediate effect, because that conviction has immediate effect. It's the lawmakers themselves which who passed the law a few years ago in 2016. A bill was passed in parliament. So it's people like Le Pen who voted the law. They wanted to be extremely harsh on people who would be convicted of acts of corruption. So I think it would be interesting for us to move the debate back to the heart of the matter, which is Le Pen's conviction. She convicted. She was um, um, she was convicted of an act of corruption, which is quite which is very serious. And secondly, the judges just did their job. To say that they were politicizing is incorrect. They just did their job, and it shows another thing. It shows that politicians are not above the law, that they are treated as normal citizens, ordinary citizens. And why not? Why would politician, even someone who intends to run for the presidency, who stands a chance of winning it, why would that person, if condemned by French justice, why would she exempted from from um, from the application of the law? And that's the whole matter. That's what we should all consider, uh, instead of saying, well, judges are politicized, etc. So that's, in my view, are the real questions.
All right. Marine Le Pen has characterized her conviction and political ban as a denial of democracy, echoing a broader far right populist tactic of depicting institutions as tools of political repression. In the light of your critique of political nudges like the Islamogauchism narrative, do you see a danger that the far right will now instrumentalize this legal verdict to delegitimize the French judiciary and fuel deeper mistrust in liberal democratic institutions?
I think it will be hard to do that. Uh, they probably already tried, but they were quite, particularly Le Pen. If you heard it speak last Sunday in Paris when she addressed a rally of supporters, a group of supporters in Paris. I think she was, of course, very harsh on the judgment. She said, of course, I'm innocent, a denial of democracy, etc. But that is, and the judges who made the decision were politicized. But she didn't make, if you like, a kind of an overall criticism of French justice. She didn't say, for instance, French justice is corrupt. She uh, she didn't say that because, of course, if she said that, it would mean that she challenges the French justice as a whole, and I would be quite serious. I would be quite serious that a main contender for the top job in French politics would undermine by her critiques, by criticism, French justice. In a democracy, when you're a politician, you should abide by the decision of justice. If you don't do that, it means that you are interfering with justice, and that's a crime. That's very serious. The French political philosopher Montesquieu in the 18th century wrote about the separation of powers. The executive, legislative, and judiciary, and he said, well, no power that is executive and legislative should be in a position to interfere or to encroach upon the power of the judiciary. If you do that, it's no longer a democracy, it's a tyranny. So justice should remain independent. That's why Le Pen will be very careful before launching an attack on justice in general. So that's why she hasn't done it. Uh, some of her supporters were probably less careful, but herself, she was quite careful not to put the blame on the judicial system in general, but rather on the people, the judges, who have issued the condemnation, saying they were, for instance, the main one of the judges was a leftist. That's what she said. But it's very difficult for Le Pen. She can't do that. If she does it, she will be seen as undermining French justice, and therefore she will be sent back to the fringe of politics. Our opponents will say, well, look, you are not, certainly not in the mainstream. You look, if you were one day elected, you would interfere with justice, and that would be very serious, of course.
All right. Given your work on diabolisation and démonisation of the Rassemblement National and the normalization of the far right in France, do you think Marine Le Pen's conviction and political ban will disrupt this process, or could it paradoxically bolster her image as a political martyr and reinforce the RNN's anti-establishment appeal? Does this verdict pose a serious challenge to RN's attempt to position itself as a credible party of governance, or might it instead deepen its populist narrative of being targeted by a hostile elite?
Again, that's a difficult situation for Le Pen to handle because she will, of course, try to defend herself. She will go. She will appeal. She has appealed already, and I think the appeal will take place very quickly, much more quickly than for ordinary citizens. Normally an appeal it takes 2 to 3 years to get into an appeal. The appeal will take place next year. So that will be very quick. Why next year? Because it will be just on time for the decisions to be made before the presidential election. So that gives Le Pen a last chance to run um, if she was to be cleared in appeal. So in a way, again, that's another evidence that Le Pen, the judges or French justice, is not ganged up against Le Pen. Justice gives another chance to Le Pen to run. Uh, so it's very difficult because uh, they've got uh, to be very moderate in their criticism of the justice system. Otherwise, they'll be seen as some kind of a party that challenges the rule of law and the independence of justice. So they just can't do that. Um, that would be someone like Donald Trump is probably doing that in the US and is getting away with it at the moment. But in France, where, by the way, Trump is quite unpopular, that wouldn't go down well. So the room for maneuver for Le Pen and a party is quite narrow. She can't. She can say, "Well, I'm innocent. I'm going to appeal." The judges who made the decisions made a very what was it was an unfair decision. I'm innocent, but they can't go much further than that. They can't criticize the judicial system in general. Um, so that's why I think, in terms of image now, because that's your question, if we look at the first opinion polls, of course, that will have to be confirmed in the long run. But I think the opinion polls, people seem not to have changed their mind. The party remains, quite high in the polls. Uh, Jordan Bardella seems to have roughly speaking, the same amount of support as Le Pen. Um, so I don't think it is about. There are two things. One thing is that clearly the National Rally is the party ahead in French politics today. That's very clear. That was shown in the last two elections, in 2024 European election, then the general election, where the party topped, uh, came on top of all parties. So that's one thing. But the other is the justice decision, and I think overall there are other opinion polls showing that the French think that it's a fair decision. That's why Le Pen can't make too much noise about it. It's a fair decision. The French voters seem to be thinking that no one should be above the law, including uh, um, national politicians. If they've done something wrong, then they should be punished like anyone would be punished in similar circumstances.
Right. In the light of vocal support Marine Le Pen has received from international right wing figures like Donald Trump and Elon Musk, to what extent does this signal the emergence of a transnational populist narrative centered on judicial persecution or lawfare? Are we witnessing a growing global solidarity among populist leaders who frame legal accountability as political victimization by elite institutions and the consolidation of a transnational illiberal alliance?
Well, very probably so. The first signs are that there's some kind of de facto reactionary or far-right international that came out in support of Le Pen. I think all the big guns, the big leaders of that international in Europe, Orban in Hungary, Salvini in Italy, Trump, JD Vance, Bolsonaro. Lots of people came out, and even Trump tweeted that he didn't know Le Pen very well. Probably doesn't know her at all, but still, someone probably mentioned the case to him. So he had to tweet in support of Le Pen. Of course, he did it because uh, the sort of people, leaders on the far right, wants to undermine the rule of law in liberal democracy. They want to challenge justice whenever justice is not on their side. And that's what Trump's been doing at home so far. So that was an occasion, an opportunity for them to do that more than, if you like, an act of support for Le Pen as such. Uh, but yes, there is a de facto far right international, and every time there is a decision that seemed to deprive far right politicians of of uh, uh, of or decisions simply seem to go against them. They seem to gang up in support of that politician, and that's what they did. What does that mean concretely? I think this sort of decision doesn't augur uh, of what the future will be one way or another. It's very unclear. When I say it's a far right international, it's not to be compared with the socialist international, of old, where you had organized parties meeting, you had you know uh, they would commit to certain policies together. It's not that. It's more, on the level of national leaders, head of states, making statements, especially via social media. So she got that support. What does that mean for Le Pen in France? I don't think it means much. As I said, Trump is deeply unpopular in France, left and right. No one likes him, almost. So I don't think to receive the support of those far right personalities will be helpful to Le Pen. I think she has to be very careful. Le Pen again wants to be seen as more mainstream. So if she seems to be sort of in cahoot or too close to very controversial politicians abroad, I don't think it would help her.
All right. From the French perspective, does Le Pen's downfall create space for a new figure on the European far right, or is her symbolic centrality too embedded in the populist narrative across Europe to be easily replaced?
It's the whole difficulty of the far right in Europe. The far right in Europe has sort of has been steadily growing, making gains, electoral gains, winning elections, even being in power in several countries. And to start with Europe, they were in power in Poland. Now they're still in power in Hungary, in Italy, a major EU country. Um, and Le Pen is doing, and the party are doing very well in France, indeed. So the AfD also in Germany has been doing very well. So there is a sort of steady rise of the far right, making important gains at the last European election. So that's one of the reasons why the far right now is no longer contemplating leaving the EU if they were in government. You know, they've understood that they could fight from within and try to change the course of action of the EU, uh, send the EU in a different direction. Um, so that's good news for the far right. However, does it translate into more coordination, more, if you like, cohesion between far right parties and governments in Europe? Not necessarily. For instance, there are at least two parliamentary groups in the EU uh, with far right parties. You know, they were unable to form just one group, which of course weakens the influence of the far right because they are in two parliamentary groups. Um, it's very also well known that far right leaders do not necessarily get along well. They do not necessarily work together. For instance, Marine Le Pen is close to Salvini, La Lega, but doesn't get along well with um, the Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, which is strange because Giorgia Meloni has a past, has a legacy which is more similar to Le Pen's. You know, they both come from far right parties initially. Of course, they've traveled some way and are now a little bit different. But whereas La Lega initially wasn't a far right party when it was created in the 1990s, it became a far right party. So it's very strange. And I can't necessarily explain the logic of the sort of a de facto alliances between far right leaders and parties. I think it's got to do with sometimes their position on policies. It's got to do with the whether leaders get along personally or not. I think it's more that, but I think that's a sign of that the far right. You know, we political scientists are used to saying that the left is always finds it difficult to unite. If you look at the French left at the moment, that's the case. They can't unite. But it seems that it's not also easy for the far right to unite, you see, for the same reason, for ideological reasons, personal reasons. They so this is where we are at the moment. The far right has been sort of has become more successful of late, but it's not a united far right. You know, it's a far right which you find in various parliamentary groups in the European Parliament. It's a far right that doesn't necessarily get along well when you know it comes to cooperating and doing things together.
All right. Jordan Bardella, Le Pen's protege, is poised to become her replacement. Based on your analysis of generational shifts within the European far right, do you see Bardella as a mere avatar of Le Penism by remaining dependent on Le Pen name, or does he represent a potentially more radical or technocratic trajectory?
There are differences between Le Pen and Bardella. Differences, first of all, he's not a Le Pen. And if Bardella runs in 2027, that will be the first time since the National Front of Jean-Marie Le Pen was launched in 1972. That will be the first time that no Le Pen runs for the FNRN party. Uh, so that's a first difference. There's also a generational difference. Le Pen is 56, Bardella is 29, and that's probably one of the that could be a sign of appeal for notably the young to have a young leader. But of course, there's also a downside. He is very untested politically. He's very inexperienced, and he's not known as being a good debater. He's not known as being a good orator. It takes time to reach that kind of level in politics. It takes years of practice, and Le Pen has improved over time. And I think with Bardella, of course, it would be a very different proposition. So. all the differences are political. I think Le Pen was more is more seems to be more supportive of this de-demonization strategy. You know, where you, unlike a father, you need to not to shift to the center. The National Rally hasn't shifted to the center; it remains firmly on the far right, but at least to make some of your flagship policies on immigration, on Islam, your interpretation of French laicite, for instance, to make them acceptable by more and more voters, to make them more acceptable also to other parties, because de-demonization works both ways. You know, it's you as a far right party uh, stopping uh, talking in a kind of very aggressive way, or talking in a kind of um, making racist statements, which do not go down well with the electorate in general. But it's also your opponents uh, shifting to the right and accepted some of your policies on immigration, for instance. So there are differences because it seems that Bardella is more of a on those issues, a bit more radical. His economic policies also are different. He's more like Jean-Marie Le Pen of old in the 1980s, 90s, more neoliberal, more in support of laissez-faire economics than Marine Le Pen. So you might think these are cosmetic differences, um, and who knows what's going to happen. If we assume that Le Pen won't run, it seems that Bardella is in a good position, is in a strong position because he's the party leader. But who knows? Something might happen, like other candidates might try to run. There might be a primary election in the party.
Mm.
Think, for instance, of Marion Maréchal, the niece of Marine Le Pen. She left the party a few years ago to join Eric Zemmour. Now she seems to have also uh, taken, you know, a step away from Zemmour. She was at the rally on Sunday in Paris in support of Le Pen. Who knows? She's very popular amongst party voters. She's a Le Pen. Although she no longer uses the word, the name Le Pen, but she's Marion Maréchal Le Pen, and for that reason, that could be nice. She is a she's a better orator than Bardella. So you know, who knows what might happen? Bardella seems to be the sort of the front runner to replace Le Pen, but we might get a surprise in the end.
Right. And lastly, Professor Marlière, what ripple effects might Le Pen's conviction and framing as a martyr have on sister far right movements in Europe, especially in states like Italy, Hungary, and Germany? Could it embolden them or shift their strategies? Do you think this case and its framing could be used by other European populists to delegitimize legal institutions, especially in countries where the rule of law is already under strain?
Might be a little bit optimistic on that, but I wouldn't think that it will impact too much on other countries' political situations. Of course, they will use Le Pen's case to talk about so-called politicized judges, to call about denial of democracy, to talk about the fact that the true patriots, as they claim to be, uh, can't are sort of sanctioned by their opponents. They can't they can't they can't tell the truth to the people. They are restricted. They are constrained. You know, all these arguments. I think they might, in debates, national debates, they might refer to the Le Pen situation to make those points. But I'm optimistic in a sense that in each national context is different, and therefore I don't think, you know, and you know, the pace of politics nowadays is very fast. You know, in a few months' time, who will still speak about Le Pen's condemnation? There will be the appeal. So in a year time, also, yes, it will be back on the agenda. But if the appeal is um, is confirmed, I think we will move on. Everyone will move on because there will be a replacement. There will be another candidate, probably Bardella. So, and people will forget about Le Pen very quickly. So that's the thing. And the other reason why I'm optimistic is that what happens to Le Pen, as I said earlier, she has to be careful about criticizing the judges, the justice system, not to be seen as undermining the rule of law, because that's a very extreme thing to do, and that will sort of um, position herself in a very extreme position, which probably most of the electorate, particularly the kind of conservative voters who are not far right, but who in the second round of a presidential election might be tempted to vote for Le Pen or for someone of the National Rally against, for instance, a left-wing candidate, if they succeed in qualifying, that electorate who is conservative, right-wing, but not far right, the National Rally needs to keep them on board, needs to keep appealing to them. If they can't appeal to them, if they lose that electorate, they will never get elected. So that's why they have to be very careful. And I think that situation is the same in all European countries. In Italy, probably with one exception, Hungary, because Hungary is already, Orban has been in power for a long time. And there are lots of people who say, well, Hungary, there are still elections, but they're not very fair. It's a very authoritarian regime. It's illiberal, okay? So we're probably with the exception of Hungary, where the opposition is clearly now quite weak because of all the laws passed by Orban's government. I think in other countries there are still counterpowers, and counterpowers, which are the position, the unions, the media, and also most of all the public, the electorate. It's not because the electorate is putting ahead the National Rally that they want in France an authoritarian regime. It's a very complex thing to understand. I think uh, supporting the far right today in France means above all that you reject the other parties, left and right. You don't think they were once in power and they failed. You try Macron, you think he failed. So it's more the idea, let's try the only party which was never in power, the National Rally. But that doesn't mean that they want an authoritarian regime. They want a regime that will curb public freedom, that will do anything. Uh, that's why Le Pen can't think of herself as the new Trump. I don't think being a Trump in France would go down well. Well, you might think in the US, who could have predicted that? You see, that's why I'm optimistic. But sometimes things can go wrong very quickly. But that's my take on it. I think that again, for Le Pen and a party to be successful and ultimately win an election, they will have to keep their line of de-demonization, which is we're no longer seen as an extreme, scary party, so that enough people could vote us in. Of course, we keep our policies against immigration, against Islam, against a number of things, but we do so because we think that there is probably a majority of people who could support that just enough. That's their line. It's it doesn't mean it's a kind of free pass to establish a dictatorship in France.
Professor Marlière, thank you so very much for your time. Appreciate it.